organizational influence. You're listening to the Durable Leadership Podcast. Here's your host, John Lamb.
My fellow durable leaders, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Thanks for tuning in. I am pumped today to introduce you guys to our guest. On the podcast today, we have a Purple Heart American hero, Mike Sarraille. Mike is the co-founder and CEO of EF Overwatch. EFO applies tried and true methods of military discipline to the field of executive search and talent acquisition. Mike is a UT Austin McCombs MBA graduate, hook 'em horns, along with his co-author, George Randall, whom we had on the podcast very recently. Mike literally wrote the book on talent acquisition. The book is called The Talent War: How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent. It's coming out November 10th. Pre-order it on Amazon. The link will be in the description below. Why November 10th? Well, if you are a Marine, you know the specialness of that date. Mike is a former recon Marine and Scout sniper. Mike is also a retired Navy officer, former member of SEAL Team 3. He served alongside of Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, authors of Extreme Ownership. Mike is also a former member of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Mike has seen 9 combat deployments, including the famous Battle of Ramadi in 2006. In addition to the Purple Heart that we just mentioned, Mike has received Silver Star, 6 Bronze Stars, and 2 Defense Meritorious Service Medals. I'm excited to get my hands on the book. I'm excited to talk to you today, Mike. I'm grateful that you're giving us a piece of your most precious commodity, your time. Most of all, I'm grateful for your service to our nation. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
John, thank you for having me. And we will get you a copy of the book so that you don't have to wait until November 10th.
I'm excited about that. I'm excited about that. Hey, Mike, I got a soft spot in my heart for talent acquisition. I say this to a lot of my executives when I step into consulting engagements. The way you change performance in the organization quickest and most effectively, pardon my poor grammar usage there, is by putting the right people in the right seats. 100%. I am convinced of that. No one can convince me otherwise. That is the best and fast way to do that. Tell me about this idea that you have, and I've seen this on some of your other posts on LinkedIn. The whole man concept, the whole woman concept, the whole person concept, mental, physical, emotional. Why do you take that approach to talent acquisition?
When we say the whole man concept, the whole person concept, you're basically saying, I want somebody that's very well-rounded. They're stable, not only emotionally, intellectually, and physically. This was a concept that Army Special Forces, colloquially known as Green Berets, really started honing in on this in the early 2000s as they were looking at their assessment and selection. Green Berets are the oldest formerly organized special operations in the United States. They've had the longest assessment and selection process, and they're still evolving. And so they honed in on this whole man concept, and they identified a few attributes. The thing is, like, you and I could come up with, like, what is the best leader? What attributes does the best leader have?
Sure.
And we'd probably come up with a list of 100. Right. You cannot assess somebody for 100 attributes. And at the end of the day, you have to prioritize everything. So they kept it to a short list of, and off the top of my head, 8. And they said, hey, we're going to look for these 8 attributes. And of course, they're weighted too. What's the most important?
Okay.
What's the second most important? So they weighted those attributes. And then they created a process, a repeatable process to assess new talent coming in and whether they should be in that organization or not. That's the thing is, you just talked about, durable leaders create processes that are repeatable.
Yep.
And then also processes that can be improved upon.
That's right.
And that the Army Special Forces did. And they were, Navy SEALs going to say they were light years ahead of where we were at in terms of a formal process. They knew what they were looking for, and then they put it into action.
This process that is repeatable and improvable kind of flies against the stereotype of what we civilians view military guys to do and be, because we see you guys as just order takers. We see you guys as just cogs in this giant Defense Department machine. You get the order from up top and you just execute on that order. Tell me I'm wrong.
So you know what I think this is, and where people lose sight is I think this is just like this pre-Vietnam sort of view of, or let's really focus in on Vietnam, an unpopular war. Their views of what the military was. We just bark orders at John, and John's going to run off and do it. And if not, I'm going to take John around the corner and give him a
Code red,
so to speak. Yes, code red. It's actually the opposite. One that was a drafty military.
Yeah.
And funny enough, let me tell a quick story. One of my mentors, a guy named Howard Prince, a clinical psychologist, West Point graduate, was again brigadier general, 1-star, wounded 3 times in Vietnam. And when he was wounded the 3rd time, it was most severe, so he became a professional instructor at West Point. And now he's a professor at UT. But he did studies on the Army when they had to switch their culture from being a drafty military to an all-volunteer force. How long do you think it took the Army to relearn how to lead in that new culture?
Changing from a draft crew to an all-volunteer crew.
Yes.
I would guess it would take decades to change the mentality.
Most people will say, it took a few years. They already knew how to lead. No, Brigadier General Howard Prince will tell you it took us a decade. It took us a full decade to reteach the force how to lead an all-volunteer force. So, these processes take time.
Yes.
And that's the thing. And there is no perfect process. Stop. And I hear people make tall claims about like we've got the best in class talent acquisition process in our domain. That is, it may, there's no perfect process. We were just talking about before we started recording this. There's a process in the military that has a 9-month assessment and selection process. The most robust hiring process, I could say arguably in the world.
9-month assessment.
Yes, assessment and selection. These men and women are put through more stress and more obstacles, and they have psychologists and out there watching them go through these training from time to time. They even have heart rate monitors on them to see who can handle the pressure from a physiological standpoint. And the belief is that during 9 months, there's nothing that people can't hide. That based off all the pressure, which we put them to pressure, not because we're sadistic and we like to see people in pain. Yeah. We put them to the brink because that's when someone's true character is revealed. That's when you can no longer hide, your true behaviors. And so that's why it's a robust process. That said, we even get it wrong time to time because remember, we have humans assessing the humans that are going through that assessment and selection, and there's biases, and we still get it wrong. So as companies approach this, there is no foolproof process. There is the realization, and if you could spread this to your people that, hey, listen, our goal is to get this right as out of 10 times, as many times as possible during each 10 candidates. But we're always going to have to learn. We're going to have to commit that this is a never-ending war, and that our process is going to have to evolve. And guess what? The process may have to change because we may go from a digital transformation to the next generation transformation in the business world. And guess what? That's going to require a whole new level of leader and candidate in different positions within our organization.
That's right.
That's me.
That's right. If you're batting 1,000, that just means you're not taking enough swings.
Absolutely.
There's no such thing as perfection in a process, right?
The pursuit of excellence. Perfection is it's a mirage.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as perfection. The day you say I'm perfect and I have nothing else to learn is the day your organization is going to start to die. That's when complacency and arrogance set in, and life is going to humble you at that point.
All of that experience, Mike, that you've gone through from the Marines to the SEALs, you transferred all of that, packaged all of that experience and knowledge into now your business of helping organizations define their talent plan, their talent process, and then select for the best individuals. Tell me what you took from here to apply it to your business and what you changed.
Yes, absolutely. So EF Overwatch intends to be the talent design consulting firm, from talent acquisition to the second part of the war. Once you get the right people in, how do you develop them? Yes. How do you create that succession planning? So as I got my MBA, when I started on a finance track, I thought I was going to become a private equity or venture capitalist, by way of probably investment banking. And halfway into my first semester, I'm like, why did I ever think this? And I liked value creation in front of myself. And so I knew veteran transition was dear to my heart. I had not made the connection yet that businesses more than anything need leaders at a greater extent than any time in our history. And so the two naturally paired, but I started an organization called Vetted Foundation with the backing of General Tony Kukolo, Admiral Bobby Inman, who was an admiral back in the 60s, 70s, and was also the de facto director of the CIA. And then even guys like Admiral William McRaven, famous for the Make Your Bed speech, who was the SOCOM commander. And they helped me stand this up, and even Huffington Post hailed it as potentially revolutionizing the way that veterans exit the military. And we basically created a 2-month business acumen course to help them make that jump from military to the private sector.
Nice.
And guess what? It failed. The first class, the results were through the roof. The results will stand with any other veteran service organization that deals with the transition. In fact, it stands above most. But ultimately, we got to get VA certifications to make it sustainable and repeatable, and I failed. Politics crushed us, but I'm not pointing my fingers at politics. What it was I should have known the landscape better. I should have known how to maneuver within that political arena to get the results that we needed, and I didn't. So when Vetted was shutting down, I said, you know what? I can make this a for-profit and actually deliver more value to the private sector. And so I took the selection process from special operations and basically turned it into a business selection process for hiring. Now, the reason that I'm so enamored is, John, you tell me if this is a fair statement. SOCOM, U.S. Special Operations, is one of the most admired organizations in the world. They're especially admired by the business world. They're effective, they're innovative, they're agile, they're adaptive, and they're one of the best led organizations in the world.
Very well respected, 100%.
Business Insider, Forbes, Inc., they're always writing articles on special operations. Well, special operations, when we select people into our organization, industry experience isn't even a criteria. I don't go to a high school and say, hey guys, today we're recruiting for the Navy SEALs. Of all the 17 and 18-year-olds, who here has special operations? Raise your hand.
0.
Oh, none of you? Well, guys, hey, the French Foreign Legion, go do that for 2 years, come back and then talk to us then. No.
Yeah.
So by nature of the talent pool that we drew from, we had to become best in class at selecting people for attributes and character. And at the end of the day, when things get the toughest, that's when skills degrade, hard skills degrade. And all you are left with is attributes and character. There are some very smart business leaders out there in the business world in the United States. Amazing, brilliant, high intellectual horsepower.
Yeah.
But when COVID hit, they didn't have the character or attributes to deal with crisis and chaos.
Absolutely.
And if there's somebody with maybe less intelligence, but could effectively apply their intelligence and operate in an environment defined by volatility, ambiguity, chaos, and uncertainty, they rose to the occasion. And that's why you want to select people. That's what you select them for, because they can also operate during the good times as well. So special operations selects people based off those character and attribute alone. And we built one of the world's most respected organizations. Why should that be any different than the business world? The answer is it shouldn't. When organizations say, well, people need a pedigree or they need a bachelor's degree, what they're saying is, I had to get a bachelor's degree to get this job, so that's the way it should be.
Right.
Why is a bachelor's a requirement for certain jobs? We hired on a search consultant. She was the 33rd woman to graduate Navy Search and Rescue School. That's a 3-week school where basically they try to drown you for 3 weeks, and if you survive or you don't quit, you're going to become a search and rescue. There's a lot more to it. But after that, she didn't have a college degree. When she got out of the Navy, she said, well, I was an air crewman, because they fly around on the aircraft. So when she went to Google jobs, which didn't exist back then, but other platforms, and said, I'm an air crewman, what do you think the job opportunities popped up?
Next to
Flight
none.
attendant. Yeah, flight attendant. That's what popped up. And she's like, okay. So she applied and she became a flight attendant. And we got her. We're so lucky that I got to meet her. We pulled her into the organization. And she has all the attributes of a high-performing leader. And she's crushing it not knowing this industry. In a matter of 2 months, she's delivering impact above and beyond what we pay her for our organization. And she was selected into EF Overwatch for one reason. We knew she had the character, we knew she had the capacity and capability, and we knew she had the attributes. So that's where that translation comes. And sometimes when we deal with clients, if I don't hear a foundational belief that leadership is the most important thing in the world, that industry experience is weighted over leadership, then that's a client that, I'm respectfully, I'm going to say, hey, thank you for reaching out. I just don't think this is the best fit. But when I have a small to mid-sized business leader reach out and say, Mike, I just need a leader. You get me the person with all the character and attributes, I'll teach them the rest. It's like Herb Kelleher from Southwest. We don't hire people for skill. We hire them for mindset and attitude.
Right.
Because you can't teach somebody drive. You can't, no matter how hard you try. If by the age of 20, their attributes are pretty much not set in stone, but they're harder to change behaviors. Changing behaviors in adults is extremely hard. It's doable, but extremely hard.
I agree. This sourcing, what you're doing here, the entire talent pipeline process, sourcing, selecting, onboarding, training, retaining, developing, promoting, all of these are terms that are related to the whole pipeline that you guys at EF Overwatch are consulting and assisting organizations to grow and get better at. Each of these has their own unique processes and their own unique workflows, but they all require at every single stage some kind of mix between human judgment and objective standards, right? Do you have X number of years of experience coding in this language? Do you have a bachelor's degree? These are objective standards that are binary, yes or no. But you just talked about introducing some human judgment in character attributes because that's what counts. I believe it. I'm passionate about it. I know you are too. Tell me, how do you develop a framework to introduce to your clients, your owners of these small to mid-sized businesses? How do you help them develop a framework that gets the right balance between these 2 points, objective standards and human judgment?
So let me caveat this. We're not saying that jobs shouldn't have what we call gates.
Yes.
A minimum intelligence level. If intellectual horsepower is weighted as a extremely important attribute for a job, absolutely. But can you articulate it? Can you articulate it to George Randall, myself, Carly Walden, and the rest of the team? And that's what really it is we sit down and say, okay, we notice you're looking for a coder. Explain this gate of 5+ years of Python. We're not questioning you. Explain to us why you chose 5 years. And usually the answer is not well thought out. It's like, well, the coder we have is doing a decent job. He and she had 5 years each. Okay, well, understand. If you're going to go out and hire doctors, of course medical school is going to be a gate. We're not advocating that. Naturally. But there should be objective requirements for every job. There should be. I mean, we have them, even though we're not going for industry experience within special operations. Said name candidate must have a certain physical fitness score. They must have a certain level on their intelligence test. And it keeps on going. Health, there are objective requirements, but the human bias is hard. And this is where it takes great leadership. And this is where, Echelon Front and Echelon Front Overwatch are tied at the hip. Echelon Front is the company started by Leif Babin and Jocko Willink, the co-authors of Extreme Ownership. And it almost segues into every bit of the talent acquisition and talent management piece that we teach. It has to be. Right. Even the performance management. In order to be effective at performance management, you need to have your A players, your best leaders, leading that performance management, the ones giving feedback. And this even happened in the SEALs. I'm not going to tell you the SEALs are not at fault. There are some leaders that we did tolerate mediocrity. We did. And to the high performers that were younger than that leader in the SEAL teams that was not a great leader, it's not a good example. And sometimes we lost good SEALs because they're like, hey, if you're going to let that guy stick around, I'm not putting in another 10 years to reach his position. That's the impacts of bad leadership. But, if you start receiving feedback from a bad leader, and that person knows it's a bad leader, you've sort of compromised the process. Yeah. So, throughout this process, we do teach humility. The greatest thing, when we say A players, I've gotten a lot of course, there's going to be naysayers on LinkedIn. Like, you can't classify people. That's toxic masculinity. I'm like, at no point when I say A players, am I talking about men or women or gay or straight or black or white. I'm talking about A players in the foundational attributes that we created is somebody that is so high on humility that they can look at somebody and say, hey, I'm here to give you your feedback. I'm going to give you a piece of feedback right now. You're going to be better than I was. You're better than I was when I was there. That said, I want you to be better when you get up to my level. You need leaders, A players that are high in a lot of those attributes, but key among them is humility.
Right.
And if you don't have that, your processes are susceptible to, they're compromised. So getting your leaders right and the people that are actually performing those processes is key as to the process itself.
Absolutely. Humility is one of the 9 attributes that you talk about in the book. You've got 9. I'm going to take that number 9 and circle it back to an answer you gave previously. What if, Mike, you do not have the time, resources to select for all 9? What if? Okay, I know they're all important, but what if? Which one would you prioritize? Give me 3 of the 9 that you would prioritize.
Okay. Well, first off, we're gonna select 3 based off of what Mike thinks is important as sort of a general manager. A general manager that's capable of stepping into any leadership position must have these 3. We always have to prioritize them. For companies that are listening, what John and I are talking about is a talent profile. And there's not one talent profile for the company. There may be a few of these attributes that the company says, hey, they are core to our core values, and every single person in this organization must have these 2. But for an engineer, that talent profile is going to be looked differently than your controller,
right,
or your COO. And so what a lot of companies don't do is, you just said, I don't have the time to do this. When business leaders say that to me, I'm like, what you're saying is you don't have the time to develop or improve your organization. I can actually argue you can't afford not to. You can't afford not to. So first off, humility. We just hit it. You're never the smartest man or woman in the room. And for those that have tried, they know what I'm talking about, because I was this guy at times in my career where I thought I was the smartest guy in the room. And when you think you're the smartest man or woman in the room, what do you usually look like? The biggest fool. The biggest fool. Humility is about, one, recognizing that you're always a WIP. You are always a work in process until the day you are in the grave. That's just life. It's also the recognition that the aggregate intelligence and experience of the people below you always far outweighs yours. Right. If I take John to the side and you had 20 subordinate leaders and I said, hey, you guys have this task, try to solve it. John, you have this task, try to solve it. I guarantee you these 20 people are going to solve it a lot quicker than you are, even if you're more experienced than all of them. Drive. God, you really put me in a pickle here, because I want to say they're all 9 are important.
They're all your babies, right?
They're all important. Drive is, you've probably heard this adage, you can't teach drive.
Yeah.
You can't teach people to want. And it's about passion. Drive is about passion and the need for constant self-improvement. And yes, you want to achieve great things. And driven people, so there's a book coming out called The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance, by a Navy SEAL who I love. I consider a brother. His name is Rich Davini. And he talks about drive, and he's like, now let's not get this wrong. Driven people also have a hint of narcissism. They do. Like, a hint of narcissism is not a bad thing.
Right.
Because that is what, it's like ego and pride. You have to find that balance.
Sure.
Pride, like narcissism, drives you to achieve great things. If put out of balance and you become egotistical, that's when you fall. And so now you got things like integrity, effective intelligence, team ability, curiosity. What we heard from a lot of the leaders that we interviewed is that all of them put a precedence on, it was funny, they all said it, intellectual horsepower. Intellectual horsepower is a requirement for any major leadership position. But this is where we all agree. They said, do not get this wrong. Intellectual horsepower is not the name on your degree, nor is it your GPA. So we renamed it as we developed these 9, because we took it not only from the business world, but the Green Berets, the Navy SEALs, the Army Rangers, the MARSOC Raiders, all had a set of the attributes they look for. They're all pretty much saying the same thing. As one Dr. Carol Green said, they're all buying ice cream. They're just buying slightly different flavors of that ice cream, but they're all looking for the same product. So amongst all of them, we found that the MARSOC Raiders are a relatively new organization, formed in 2006. It's when the Marine Corps officially entered into SOCOM. And I love the Marines. So they classified it as effective intelligence. All special operations we talked about has a gate that everyone must score this minimum on the intelligence test. Yeah. After they score that minimum, that gate is closed. It's no longer a factor in the assessment and selection process. And what they found is that higher degrees of scores on that test don't necessarily correlate to higher performance. Differentiator is effective intelligence. If John, and I guarantee your IQ is probably much higher than mine. I've been also hit in the head and blown up a couple times.
Different strengths.
Cognitive degradation on this part. So let's say you're at 130 and I'm at 115. It's who has the ability to apply what they have to a greater extent. That's right. To solve asymmetric problems for which there is no book solution.
100%.
Because we had some guys in the SEAL teams that came from Harvard that were wildly intelligent, but yet lacked situational awareness, lacked common sense, and couldn't apply what great intelligence they had in an effective manner on the battlefield. And hence they weren't the best SEAL leaders for that domain. But you pick them up and put them into the tech sector, maybe different gates, maybe they're much more highly successful in that arena. So those are my three, but I've not been asked that. And it actually really bothers me now because I'm going to go back and actually put some thought, like if I have to prioritize those, whittle it down to three, what are they?
Well, I'm with you, Mike. I don't think you have to. I agree that if you design the process well enough and you have sufficient bandwidth in your organization to select for all 9, then you're going to come out with a better process. You're going to come out with a better product. I mean, if you focus on the process of looking and selecting for candidates who have all of these 9 attributes, right? I just wanted to see of which of these you would pull out as your favorite.
What about you? I mean, you've seen these. What are your top 3?
Team ability is first and foremost on my mind, because here's what I've noticed. Here's what I'm absolutely convinced of. Inside of an organization where you have to work together, specialization and coordination beats competition, hands down, every single time. I work with executives who try to compete for credit, for budgets, for resources, for headcount. But if you coordinate and cooperate, you will make your organization better over time. I am 100% convinced of that. And that's not me being warm and fuzzy, right? That's not me pulling out the California hippie lovey-dovey thing. That is empirical in economic game theory. You coordinate and specialize, you will beat the guys who compete every time. So team ability for me is number 1.
For a guy that comes from the SEAL teams, yeah, I was debating on that one. You're absolutely right. And this is not me trying to say, hey, the military works as a team, even though, we put precedence on it. If you're not a team player, you're going to be removed from the equation pretty quick.
Yeah.
In the business world, when we work with companies, because I work on the leadership consulting side, teamwork sometimes is pretty bad.
It's tough.
And there's no, when we talk about teamwork, what I'm trying to achieve is unity, utter unity. I mean, the Marine Corps calls this esprit de corps.
Yes.
It is a healthy sort of camaraderie amongst your people, which is formed through really hard tasks.
Yes.
Like COVID, believe it or not, is building a lot of esprit de corps within these companies. They went through a struggle together. They're going to come out stronger together if they can find that team ability. But it also is, as you talk about game theory, it's the exponential effect. Ray Dalio recently talked about it. It's like 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. That's for some that can achieve it, 1 + 1 equals 2.
Yeah, if you do what you do best, Mike, and I let you do that, and you let me do what I do best, we as a team are going to have surplus productivity. And that goes to the organization. We will not will not have surplus productivity. It won't be zero sum. It will be negative sum if you and I compete for the same bucket of resources. That's empirical. That is not me, in my opinion. That's science.
John, you're going to like this one. So Brian Decker was a lieutenant colonel in the Army Special Forces. He was selected to be the commander of Army Special Forces Assessment and Selection. It's a 3-week process in which they are selecting people to start the training, and the training is like a year, 12 months to 18 months long. And so he revolutionized, the acronym is SFAS, Special Forces Assessment and Selection. Well, they were asked to host 2 groups, and it was a study. A group of undergrads and a group of MBA students from a nearby university. We won't say the name, but people can draw conclusions if they know where that training takes place. And they were all hand selected for being high achievers. And so they were given the same task, and the group of undergrads worked together, the group of MBA students. And Brian Decker's laughing as he's telling me this story. He's like, we naturally assumed these people with more life experience would just dominate. He said it was disgusting how the undergrads outperformed the MBA students. So he said, what we found is they had this sense of team ability and humility amongst all of them, where none of them had the answer, but they pulled together what intelligence and life experience they had, and they just dominated the MBA students, where they could tell there was politicking going on.
Ego.
People, yes, even as these people, were in a very elite MBA program, had business, experience under their belts. They couldn't pull together as a team, and hence they lost. So that team ability is huge.
Yeah, 100%. Let me shift gears here and ask you about your perspective as a consultant in the TA space, your expertise in this world. We're looking into the marketplace, and unemployment rates, all-time high. Of course, there are certain jobs and sectors that are hit harder than others. But overall, there are more job candidates than there are job openings. Some recruiters might look at this and they say, oh, that's a target-rich environment. I can just pull people and just plug them in. Others will say, well, there's so many candidates out there, it's not a target-rich environment. That's more of a problem than a solution. It's a filter problem. By and large, we're going to call this a buyer's market, buyer's labor's market.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What are you telling your clients, your business owners of these small and mid-sized businesses, of how to approach this? What are the traps and what are the opportunities in this buyer's market?
Well, first off, the 2 people you just described, one sort of has a positive attitude and one has more of a pessimistic approach to it. I'll tell you the differentiator between businesses when the COVID hit. Businesses that are actually like grinding through this, that are thriving through this, that are going to come out stronger. Yeah. Well, this is an opportunity. Now, I'm not saying that we knew there are people that are losing their lives to this pandemic, and there's nothing to joke about there, but companies that knew their competitors would be losing their minds, not dealing with the chaos, knows that in crisis, that's where you make the most market share. That's a very capitalist view. And others, a lot of companies are going away. So, what I say is, if you don't see this as a target-rich environment and you view it as a filter problem, you lack processes from the start. You didn't have processes in place. If you have great processes, you should be engaging in opportunistic hiring right now. This is your opportunity, because a lot of the talent that's out there, when this economy starts really recovering in quarter one of, based off projections, quarter one of 2021, people are going to start to hire at a greater extent.
Right.
And that's going to come off the market. So this is a great time if you have great processes in place to engage in opportunistic hiring. Even if a role doesn't necessarily exist, you find great people, and this is a proven theory by organizations. You create a role around that person, because as this economy, again, recovers, a lot of these companies are going to experience growth. And do you know how many companies I've seen dealt with growth? Out of the hundreds, maybe 1 or 2. The 1 or 2 that did that had a deep bench of talent. Because if you don't, once you start to experience growth, what are you going to engage it? We call it the butts and seats mentality. Hey, we just got contracts. We need 20 people. And that's when you deviate from your process.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care. Just get them through the process quick. We need to get them on the factory floor. We need to start moving now.
Yeah.
Well, when you start to deviate from the process, that's when things go wrong. Processes or standard operating procedures are usually written by our predecessors to say, don't make these same mistakes. If you stick to these few principles, and if there's times to deviate from standard operating procedures, you will most likely set yourself up for success. So yeah, view it as a target-rich environment, engage in opportunistic hiring because growth is around the corner. And when you grow, even if you had to expend beyond your workforce budget, I guarantee you it'll pay you dividends in the end. That's tough for a lot of business leaders to do that are very cost conscious because we know people are your largest overhead expense.
My great segue into my next question. I think you read my mind. This opportunistic hiring that you just talked about. Now that we're in a target-rich environment where individuals are plentiful and job opportunities are few, hiring managers have the upper hand of saying, you know what, I'm going to pay you a little bit less than what I think you're worth. They have that opportunity because if this person says no, I, as a hiring manager, can easily go to the next person. Let's take this opportunity to see how TA professionals like yourself can do not just organizational good, but community good. How are you, I'm going to be an employee advocate here, how are you coaching and advising organizations to believe that now is not the right time to go cheap on employees?
I mean, Reed Hastings was just, I don't know if you saw the article that came out on Netflix about paying astronomically high wages to the best employees. And Reed Hastings said it because great talent is easily worth 10 times the average performer. And that's why we're willing to pay them. Guys, there is one criteria. You can create an organization that is healthy, that is loved, there's deep loyalty, but your pay has to be in the ballpark. It has to be comparable with your industry. And if you're going to go cheap, I don't like if somebody says, hey, Mike, the competitors are going to offer me $30,000 more than what you offer. I understand. You're looking at it from a view of, hey, man, this is what's best for my family. And I won't be surprised if they come back to my organization because they'll say, Mike, that organization was not well led. I now realize that money's not the entire factor. But don't go cheap on talent. Great talent is worth it. It's so often that people contact us and they get our fees for EF Overwatch, which is in line with executive search. And they're like, it's about $10,000 more than what we wish to pay. And I'm not really going to budge. I know the worth of our organization and our time is money too. I tell them, hey, the only thing I would say is ask yourselves as we get off the phone, am I arguing over $10,000 for a salesperson that could come in and easily drive another $400,000 in sales? What's the return on that $10,000? It's massive. So we are prideful that when we put leaders in front of you to join your organizations, that they're going to drive impact. They're going to make your culture healthy. And you can't put a price on one of our leaders coming in and reinforcing a healthy culture, a culture of leadership. And so if you're honestly coming to me about $10,000, which I understand is a lot of money, again, it goes back to that mindset. Good talent is worth all the money in the world.
Let me, we're coming up against our time here. Let me ask you a broader question. As you engage with organizations, these executives who have one particular mindset, how do you convince them that they need to build a culture where everyone believes in their core ethos that talent acquisition is a competitive advantage?
Before we hit record on this, you and I were talking a lot about PE, private equity and venture capital. We are a talent acquisition provider for very senior positions within a home improvement company on the East Coast. And they've been growing massively. And somebody recently offered them an investment, and in the portfolio it said, you put a precedence on leadership. You have dedicated to winning this war on talent. So you could put a valuation on leadership, and that's what culture is. Culture is ultimately not what you say. It's not the flowery core values or the mission statement on the wall. It's what you do. Hell, Ben Horowitz just wrote a book about this. It's not what's on the wall. It's what you do. It's not what you say. It's what you do. If you have a culture of leadership, honestly, it's hard to put a value on that, but smart organizations, smart leaders understand the impacts are beyond measure. Now, if a CEO comes to me and I've got to convince them of this, of course, to me, I'm like that, okay, challenge accepted. But I can only go so far. If I'm trying to tell a 50-year-old CEO about the importance of leadership and culture, and I can't turn him around in a series of conversations, that is a good example of an individual that can no longer innovate and adapt and understand that, maybe they've just from their predecessors, their mentors, don't put a precedence on leadership like we do. So I only have so much time in the world. I love talking with people. I love building relationships. Yeah. But if we are not aligned in terms of mindset and more importantly, aligned in values, yeah. I definitely love people with a different viewpoint on things. I think generally your values and your mindset have to be alike in terms of positivity and integrity. But if we're not aligned, it's a person I want to stay in touch with, but not necessarily a person that I'm going to do business with.
What kind of organizations do you work well with? What's the space or the industry and organization size that EF Overwatch fits the best at?
So really, when I started Vetted, naturally, I focused on the Fortune 500s because I was in the, I needed donations. Most corporations have foundations, and that's naturally who I went through. I was not entirely impressed. The thing about becoming so large in a publicly traded company is you've got to watch your talent game. Sometimes what you see is, I even saw this in the SEAL teams, is guys would feel tougher with the weight of the SEAL organization behind them. And they would not be as respectful towards people because they had the weight of the SEAL organization behind them. Sometimes I had that feeling with Fortune 500s. And so as we pivoted and we found that we're like, man, the backbone of America are small to mid-sized businesses. And the most success we're having is with all our placements is in these small to mid-sized businesses across a lot of different industries. But the common thing amongst all these small to mid-sized business leaders is that we all believe leadership is more important than industry experience. And these are usually people that came from very little and had to grind to build the companies that they have today, multi-million-dollar companies. And they know they need some help. And these people in particular, I'm stealing this quote from a 75th Ranger Regiment buddy of mine. He said, companies that put a precedence on grit and leadership over capital and assets are the companies that we're going to do business with all day long. And it'll be a great relationship. If it's not, but small to mid-sized businesses is our sweet spot. And I've got a spot in my heart for small to mid-sized business leaders because I'm a small business leader, right. Fresh out of the military, trying to grow something that brings value to this economy. And if I can bring more value to small to mid-sized businesses, so be it. Fortune 500s are massive. They don't need my help, and sometimes they're way too smart to need my help. So that's fine.
Sometimes they're way too smart for their own good, based on my experience. Mike, I appreciate your time. I appreciate what you and EF Overwatch, what you guys are doing, because vet transition is a huge issue. That is a challenge for organizations and for these heroes that come back from these very difficult situations and they don't know how to make that transition from the military life to civilian life. You guys are doing God's work there, doing noble work, and I appreciate it very much. I appreciate you and your service, your brothers and sisters, your service to our nation. I couldn't do what I do. I couldn't have the life that I have without you guys standing out there on the front line for us. So I appreciate that very much. Where can people get a hold of you, Mike?
You can get a hold of me at mike@efoverwatch.com or through the website efoverwatch.com. John, I'm completely appreciative for this opportunity to speak with you. I think we spoke longer than we did the actual podcast. And I think there's going to be a lot more to come between you, and George.
I appreciate that a lot. Hey, Durable Leaders, you guys absolutely need to get your hands on this book. It's called The Talent War, How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent. Coming out November 10th. Link for the pre-order will be in the description down below, so check that out. Mike, thank you for spending your time with us.
John, thank you.